let's talk a little bit about Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
Came out in a speech recently, and he did not mince words, and he said that the MAGA wing of the Republican Party, they're effectively semi-fascists.
Yes.
So that's what he said. Now, that was part of the same speech where he went after Republicans aggressively for voting against the IRA, for voting against the CHIPS Act. He sort of listed a whole bunch of things, like every single Republican voted against lower prescription drug prices. Every single Republican voted against, whatever, fill in the blank with, 15% corporate minimum tax rate. He went in. And it was very clearly not the Biden we're used to seeing where, their fever will break and they'll work with us after Trump. No, that didn't happen. But now it looks like at 1,000 years old, he's finally like, oh, yeah, maybe
these guys are part of the problem.
Right.
Who would have thought it?
So he says this semi-fascism thing. And, of course, the right is...
Oh, there's a meltdown over it.
They're melting down over it, and they're acting like Trump never said anything that was even close to as egregious as this. It's like, are you kidding me? That was a random Tuesday for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
When he launched his fucking campaign, he said, the Mexicans, they're criminals, they're rapists. I assume some are good people. He launched his fucking campaign by saying, remember when he called for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims coming in the... again, this is child's play for Donald Trump. He probably calls Biden and every single Democrat a communist before he eats fucking breakfast over on Truth Social.
True.
Okay, so anyway, Larry Hogan, who's a moderate Republican governor, Maryland, right? That's where he's the governor?
Yes, correct.
He comes out and, he's trying to pave a lane for himself on the Republican side, which is literally the most hilarious thing I've ever heard.
Good luck, bro.
This guy, dude, he wouldn't even get 1%. He wouldn't even get 1%.
No.
It would be the saddest thing I've ever seen, but he clearly wants to run for president. He comes out, he's going to take a stand here against Biden and tell you why this rhetoric is not good. Take a look.
So you heard my conversation with the DNC chair, Harrison, about semi-fascism as a label that President Biden has applied to Republicans. What do you think of that?
I think it's that kind of divisive rhetoric on both sides that's really bad for America. And I've been talking about the toxic politics. And when if Republicans are calling Democrats socialists and communists, and we have the president of the United States calling Republicans fascist, I don't think it adds to the overall discussion. We ought to just talk about the differences we have on the issues and focus on the problems that most people in America want us to focus on.
All right. So let me ask you. I actually think this is a very interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Number one, should Biden have actually called Republicans semi-fascists? So there's a question of, is it accurate? And then there's also a question of, is it politically intelligent to do so? So is it strategic to do so? So go ahead, take a crack at those.
So first I want to read what he said here so we have the complete context. He says, what we're seeing now is either the beginning or the death knell of extreme MAGA philosophy. He called out those he labeled as extreme Republicans and said, it's not just Trump, it's the entire philosophy that underpins the, I'm going to say something, it's like semi-fascism. So in terms of, is it accurate? I think it's hard to deny in terms of Republican elites and some of the figures that they nominated that it's accurate. I mean, Trump literally just put out a statement this week that was like, you should basically install me as dictator.
He did do that.
So
he did do that. Yep.
Kind of hard to deny. Now, where I always draw the line here is, and this is, across the board, you can say like, go after the people in power. I mean, the Trumps of the world, the other people who are elected in office, who are running for elected office, like be relentless in calling them out, call them semi-fascist, like be accurate, but these people deserve your total and complete scorn. That's different from the general population. And this is what Republicans are trying to do with this is to say...
they're talking about you.
Yeah, they're talking about you. He just called half the country fascist.
And that is just not even close to true.
That's not what he said. And I think he was pretty careful to make it clear that he's talking about Trump and his sort of like allies and acolytes in Republican leadership. But yeah, if you're going after them, I have no problem with it. And in fact... Listen, in terms of the political calculation here, I also actually think it's sound because part of the reason why Republicans are struggling right now is because independents and moderates are more likely to label their candidates as extreme. So in terms of political messaging, I also don't think it's a bad thing because regular American voters are also looking at these candidates and going like, what the hell is wrong with you on things like abortion and on election conspiracies and on other issues. And the other thing that I'll say finally is it has been nice to finally have Joe Biden, apparently at the age of however old he is, realize that the Republicans are a major issue in Washington and you're not going to be able to like hold hands with Mitch McConnell and sing Kumbaya and work things out. That's not where they are today. And so the fact that he seems to have woken up to that reality is, I think, part of why he's scored some significant wins here in the past couple of weeks.
Okay, so here's my breakdown of it. Now, on the first question is accuracy. Okay, is it accurate? Well, I'm going to read. This is from Robert Paxton, who's a political scientist and an expert on fascism.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to give you some of the traits they say
Okay.
about fascism here. So, a sense of overwhelming crisis beyond the reach of any traditional solutions.
Okay.
The primacy of the group toward which one has duties superior to every right, whether individual or universal, and the subordination of the individual to it. So sort of like a mob mentality type thing. The belief that one's group is a victim, a sentiment that justifies any action without legal or moral limits against its enemies, both internal and external.
Yes.
Dread of the group's decline under the corrosive effects of individualistic liberalism, class conflict, and alien influences.
Okay.
The need for closer integration of a purer community by consent if possible or by exclusionary violence if necessary.
Okay.
The need for authority by natural chiefs, always male, culminating in a national chieftain who alone is capable of incarnating the group's historical destiny. The superiority of the leader's instincts over abstract and universal reason. The beauty of violence and the efficacy of will when they are devoted to the group's success.
Yeah.
The right of the chosen people to dominate others without restraint from any kind of human or divine law, right being decided by the sole criterion of the group's prowess within a Darwinian struggle. So that's his academic breakdown. The layman's definition, of course, is fascism is far-right, authoritarian, ultra-nationalist political ideology. That's what it is. And usually they embrace autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy, and that's the gist of it. So in terms of the accuracy of it, I think he has a very sound argument that what we're seeing now on the far right is at the very least semi-fascism. You might even call it fascism.
Yeah, I mean, you see this like authoritarian instinct, certainly. Like, I just am going to assert that I'm the leader of the country, I'm the rightful leader, and election results be damned. You have the cult of personality, and you have from a lot of these, Marjorie Taylor Greene types, like a glorification of the idea of like a civil war.
Right. That's all true.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of, I will say, though, I am sympathetic to people who are normies. They are not political junkies. And when they hear rhetoric like this, they might actually equate it to like, this is when people were calling Barack Obama a Muslim Marxist or communist, right?
Yeah.
So they'll say, oh, it's kind of, equal extremism on both sides. So I'm actually sympathetic to the idea also that when somebody brings up fascism, the only thing that pops into most people's minds is Mussolini and Hitler. And if you equate those two with fascism, then any sort of comparison between any American politician figure and that is, they would say, offensive and wrong. So I guess my point here is I understand the criticism of, hey, maybe don't use that. But what I would say is, and I don't even think you could argue against this, is if you're not going to use that term, you better use authoritarian, because that is 100% accurate and it doesn't have the historical baggage that fascism does.
Yeah. Fascism has also, in fairness, been thrown around a lot in the Trump era.
Correct.
At times, I think, accurately. At times, inaccurately.
Correct.
And so it also has become like, that's part of the context that people hear it in now, is just like, oh, here goes these liberals hyperventilating again about something.
But I don't think it's equal either. Sorry to cut you off.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just don't think, like, the point that Hogan made of like, yeah, you got people on the right calling these people on the left socialists and communists, and that's not fair. And the left calling people on the right fascists, that's not fair. I think it's much more fair.
Yeah, right.
When you look at Trump, who literally just said, install me as president again without an election, or redo an election of which there's no legal authority to do any of that shit. Yeah, I think that's fair to use the F word for that.
And sent that cryptic message to the Department of Justice of like, oh, temperature's really hot right now. Better cool it down, and sending his little, friend Lindsey Graham out on television.
He was
to be like, there are going to be riots in the street. Again, the glorification of violence and threats of violence to achieve an end that he's unlikely to achieve through like conventional democratic or legal processes.
He was saying we should kill drug dealers. Death penalty for drug dealers. You can use the F word for that. I'm totally fine with using the F word for that.
Yeah.
But I disagree. Even the furthest left figure in the Democratic Party, they are social democrats. Even Bernie calls himself a democratic socialist. He ain't a fucking democratic socialist. He's a social democrat.
Yeah. Agree. So one piece of that equation is accurate and the other piece is not accurate. And then it's also, Larry Hogan is a perfect example of the like DC sort of like pieties around language and the norms and like, oh, we have to have this bipartisan comedy while we're screwing people over. We're just not like talking about it in sort of like uncouth language. And I find that kind of like civility humping extremely irritating as well.
So, and to wrap up, let me agree and buttress one of the points that you made before, which I think is even more correct than you realize, which is you made the point, but somehow I'm sort of going above and beyond that point to further agree with it. Okay, so if anything, his language here is too soft, not just because he used the semi word, but also because he's making a distinction even among elected Republicans, where he says there's the Trump types who are, the fascist types, and then there's the non-Trump Republicans who, according to people like Nancy Pelosi, are, we need a big, strong Republican Party. Where's my Republican Party back? I hate that distinction because even with what you'd say is the best of the anti-Trump Republicans, it's Liz Cheney who voted with Trump 93% of the time.
Right.
So if anything, you're too soft on the elected officials and you're too strong. Well, he didn't say it, but the taste you have in your mouth is he's perhaps too strong against your average Republican voter. Where I always try to make a strong distinction between here are the elected officials, they're the problem, and it's virtually all of the elected Republicans. Fuck your caveats. I throw in Liz Cheney with the Donald Trumps, even though they disagree on one fucking issue.
Well, and even if you want to give Liz Cheney credit and say, well, she doesn't literally want to overturn the election, so she may have an ideology that's abhorrent, but I wouldn't call her a fascist. Like, even if you want to give her that credit, like, she was just drummed out of the party. Like, it's very clear there's no room.
Also, she supported an election being stolen in 2000. Right. So it's not like it's a principled objection to elections being stolen.
And that time, they were successful.
Right, exactly.
And I didn't hear you crying about it then. But yeah, I mean, look, it's clear that there's no room for the Liz Cheneys in the party. That's not what the party is. The party, and this is, I think, part of why the fascism or semi-fascism label kind of fits. Like, the party's about one thing, your loyalty to Donald Trump, the charismatic, like, leader, daddy figure. And so, they've made it a cult of personality. If you're on the wrong side of that issue, then you're going to get tossed down. That's been very clear in the primaries this year.
So I'm trying to look up right now as I'm talking to you. Mitt Romney, who's held up as like the
reasonable Republican.
The reasonable Republican. And it looks like he's voted with Trump 75% of the time. So look, I'm a huge fan of nuance on this show. So you want to tell me the specific issues where Romney's better? I'm listening.
Yeah.
Right? But I do think it's fair to say that in general, the party, the elected officials are extremist. Voters are a different question. There's some percentage that are extremists among the voters, but I don't like doing the whole broad generalization about the voters. I think you need to be even more nuanced with the voters.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's where I land on that, is that the language is relatively accurate. If anything, he's too soft on the elected officials. And I think the meltdown is obviously absurd, and Larry Hogan's comments are ridiculous.
Are you concerned about political blowback over it?
No, I think it works. And here's why. It's intuitively connecting with independents now and just run-of-the-mill voters.
Agreed.
Because they see everything that's going on with the January 6th committee, with Trump saying the insane shit he's saying, which is getting headlines everywhere.
Right.
With Roe versus Wade being overturned. With Republicans voting against health care for veterans who are toxic burn pit victims.
Yeah.
People see that, and the accurate reaction to that is, that's fucking extremism. That's extremism. And I don't like that at all. And so it's intuitively landing.
Yeah, and that was exactly the CBS News Battleground Tracker tested this of like which candidates do people think are extreme. And you have women and independents are more likely to say it's Republicans who've been nominating candidates they'd call extreme, more so than Democrats nominees. And so I think it does fit into what has been a very effective attack line from Democrats. They mostly start with the issue of abortion, exposing what are wildly out of the mainstream views on forcing raped children to bear their rapist babies and these sorts of things. But it connects to a broader argument about just these candidates are really out there. Like, you may not be totally satisfied with Joe Biden and the Democrats and the economy's not amazing and all that, but these people are really, really out there. So I think it lands in that political context. And I do also think that because Joe Biden has by and large been very restrained in the type of rhetoric that he has used about Republicans, people also have that as background context, that he's not one of these people that's just been like running around with their hair on fire all the time.
Yeah, but I mean, you're right. But I also would have liked it if all along he was hammering this home, because a trick that I think the right is phenomenal at, that the left has been terrible at, or Democrats have been terrible at, is the idea of repetition until you make it the duh position. And this is what happened with Obamacare. Like when Obamacare initially passed, you had people on the right over and over and over saying, they're going to kill your grandma. They have death panels. They're going to kill your grandma. They have death panels. They're going to kill your grandma. They have death panels. And you would think the reaction from the public would be, that's so absurd. Of course that's not the case. This is ridiculous. But no, the reaction was they repeated it so many fucking times that the reaction from people was, even if that's not true, I don't sort of trust this thing anymore.
There must be something there.
So there's got to be something there.
Like, it
so
may not
drove
be
it
killing
down.
grandma, but there's got to be an issue,
So
something there.
You repeat over and over and over and over, it becomes the duh position. So Biden's trying to make it, Republicans, the fascists.
My bottom line takeaway is that I've been happy to see Joe Biden for the first time seem to actually understand like where he should be training his fire and not always at the left part of his party.
Dark Brandon, baby.
Yeah, that's right.
Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.